So now that we have all our material assignments properly placed, we can start defining what these materials actually look like. Right now, we're just using the basic material that comes in these, which is just a simple white. But we know we want to have some wood, some glass, maybe some metal on these edges here. And this is something that Modo makes really simple for you with the use of their material preset library. So in the model, in our render viewport, you'll see down here we have render preset browser. So if we click that, it's going to come up with all sorts of different presets, different ones for environments, different mesh ones, materials, and assemblies, all sorts of other items. But the one thing we want to focus on are just materials. We want to assign the materials right now. We'll go into environments soon enough. So I'm going to double click, open this material library, and let's just take a look at what we have in here. We have double click, all sorts of different cloth, go up. I think there's about 1,000 material presets that we can choose from. But we already know what we want. We want a nice wood material. So I'm going to go in there, and let's take a look. Well, we got some ash, and it's a little too light color for what I want to play with. So too high. The wood. Maybe a pine. It's still not really doing it for me. Let's take a look at this mahogany. And those are looking pretty cool. I like that sort of dark, rich value to the wood. So if we want to there's a few ways to kind of get these materials in there. But since we've already assigned our material groups, that's always what you want to do first. If you just start dragging presets on the polygons, you might start to get into a kind of a bad workflow. I find the proper workflow is always define your materials first. We went through, we selected each one, gave the table its material, its edge, and everything like that. So now if I simply take the preset I like, so let's use this polished mahogany 2D, and I drag and drop it, right here you can see what's selected. If I drag and drop it onto the table itself in the viewport and release, hey, we got some wood material already in there. That's pretty cool. If I wanted to maybe try this satin finished one, drag and drop, it's going to automatically update and replace the material. So now you can see in that table group, we have the new group for the satin finished mahogany preset. I like that first one, and we'll go through and we'll change some of these attributes later on. But this is definitely a nice start. And as you can see, it's a pretty simple material. We have a diffuse color image, so if I double click that, that's going to show us what the image is that is driving it. So this is the image set for the color map. So over here, we saw the diffuse color when we changed earlier. If I made this kind of a random pink, nothing's going to happen because that's being overridden by this diffuse color image map that we set. So he's going to override whatever value is set for diffuse color. And likewise, we have that same image, a grayscale version, set for the bump map. And a bump map just gives slight surface details, like as if if you look at any sort of material, there's always a little bit of breakup and texture to it. And that's what the bump map itself is doing. But we can kind of see the image is a little too stretched. Let's go to our model viewport and let's turn on shaded texture. And that's how we can see the image is projected, nicely across this table. But we want to make this pattern a little bit smaller. So on the image itself in the shader tree, there's this texture locator. So with the high layer selected, texture locator, let's go look at how it's being projected. Right now it's using the UV map. So that's defined over here in the UV editor, and we're not going to get too far in there for this tutorial, but all we know is we want to basically make this wrap more times throughout this texture. So if I take this horizontal wrap and do a 3, hit tab, hit 3 again, hit enter, now you can see that grain's kind of being projected 3 times on that image. Before it was only 1. This UI didn't update, but you can see here we're getting a much smaller kind of grain to our image. So I like that. That's looking good. So let's move on to the next material. So let's come to the render preset browser. Let's go back up. And let's put a little metal edge on this edge here, on the table edge. So let's go into the metal group. Maybe a nice brass. A little too yellow for me. chrome. That might work. Let's see what else we have. Oops. Aluminum, still a little bright. Magnesiums are kind of nice. So I'm going to use this Burnish Magnesium. Let's just try that. So again, we're going to drag and drop that right onto, you can see it select. The material group is selected. And there we go. Now there's a nice little bit of metal edge to this table. Right now it's being reflected pretty bright because the environment is this sort of real bright, soft gradient. But we'll change that in the next chapter. So let's go up, and we want to create something for the glass itself. So what we can do, you probably guessed there's going to be a glass material. But you know what? I want to kind of show you how to kind of create your own material. So for the glass one, let's do this on our own. It's actually creating glass and water is actually a very simple material to create. So we can go up into the shader tree and find it right here in the list, or in this preview engine, if I just click on that pixel, it's going to take me to whatever material that pixel has defined. So if I click the table, it's going to come and select the material that we defined for that table. Again, we want to define the glass one. So people always think glass is a hard material to create, but it's actually super simple. So what we want to do is input a few parameters. So the diffuse amount is how much light and color is being bounced back out from the particular material. But this is only based on transparency. A glass has only transparent materials. So we actually want 0 diffuse. So its material is not going to bounce back any light. It's all going to be handled in the material transparency tab. The specularity is this little highlight we see here. That's any light that's in Modo scene are going to create the specular highlight. So the proper attribute for this would be 2% specular amount and 100% Fresnel. So the Fresnel is kind of on the edges of this glass. So anything that's facing kind of away from the camera is the Fresnel. Anything that's facing directly at you is a specular amount. We're not going to have time to go into that right now, but I just want to kind of show you how to set this material up. And in the real world, there's no such thing as specularity. It all comes from reflection. So if you want a physically accurate material, click this Match Specular attribute here. And now that's going to make the reflection the same values as we had here for the specular amount. So if I change the specular up now, it's actually going to be way more reflective as well. But what we want now is just 2% reflective and 100% reflective for Fresnel. Again, we could enter those values here, 2 and 100, and that's going to give us the same result as actually hitting this match specularity. And that's what we see here. We have the pixels that are facing directly at the camera have a 2% reflection, and anything that's facing 90 degrees, the Fresnel angle, is 100% reflective. So you'll notice that on pretty much all real-world materials that have a bend to them, anything that's more on the outer edges are going to be a little bit more reflective. So next we want to add some transparency settings to that glass. So that's where this material trans property is. And sometimes you'll notice that these property tabs start kind of getting filled up. We had that one mesh selected, so it's actually shown as the mesh properties and things like that. So to kind of clear out this menu, if you hit escape 2 times, it's going to deselect all your items in your scene. But now we can come back and click this material. Well, double click it again and just click the material itself. And now we're only looking at the material properties for that. No longer do we have the mesh properties and things like that. It just kind of cleans up this list a little bit. So let's come to the material trans properties. And since we have 2% of its color attributes coming from reflection, we want the other 98% coming from its transparency. So now we're getting pretty close to the glass material. We see through it, we see some reflections in it, but what it needs is a refractive index. So if you ever look at your feet inside of a pool, your hand underwater, you can see there's a little bit of a bend to that, and that's coming from the refractive index material properties Each material is a little bit different. Same with glass, but we don't have to really worry about that. This little drop down here is going to give us all these little presets. So if we wanted to make this water material, which we will do for the liquid, we can click that material. Or we can come down to this, maybe the flint glass light, and that's going to give us a refractive index of 1.5. Now you're kind of seeing what looks like a lot more kind of a proper bend into the refractive qualities of that glass. And that was pretty it. All we really had to change were 0% diffuse, 2% specular and reflection, 100% on their Fresnel angles, 98% transparency, and 100 or 1.5 more or less for the refractive index. Now, if you forgot all that or didn't follow along, guess what? We got a preset for you. Come in here to thick glass, and you can just drag and drop that right on there. And you'll notice it's pretty much giving you more or less the exact same qualities. But I'm going to undo that and just use the proper ones that we set up already. But feel free to jump in here and play with these other materials. All right, so next let's do the liquid itself. So we're going to create that whiskey sort of material. But let's use a preset this time for that one. So if we come down to our organic material presets, there's a liquid tab. And, this beer amber is, fairly close to the materials of a whiskey. We'll change the colors and things like that. But right now, if we drag and drop, we're not going to be able to get into that liquid because it's on the other side of the glass. We can't actually see. If we navigated the camera around and saw the inside, now I can drag and drop that and hit the actual material for that liquid. But then we changed our camera. We don't really want to change our camera. So the other way of getting a preset into your scene is dragging and dropping that into the liquid group. So instead of dropping it into the viewport, I'm going to drag and drop that into our group called liquid. And there we go. Now we have that liquid right here on the glass. On the, so the preset of the beer amber is inside that liquid group. And for now, it's looking fairly good. We'll change all the color attributes and things like that later on. But more or less, we're starting to get something that looks, like liquid in glass. Now, the ice cubes are all we have left. And let's save this real quick. And let's go pop and look at our reference. Most of these ice cubes look almost glass-like. They look pretty darn close to the same material attribute as the cup. That's because the product shots are kind of using real clean glass. Or ice. They want to keep it looking super transparent. But if we went back to that glass preset library to these textured ones, well, I almost think that this glass frosted looks a little bit more like an ice cube would. Let's try that. Drag and drop that into the ice cube. And I think that looks pretty good. It's not completely see-through. It's got, what it has on it is a bit of a bump map, or actually it's not using the bump map. It's using a bit of this refractive roughness. So that's just kind of breaking up the complete clear transparency nature. And it's giving, so we don't see all the way through it, just kind of giving a little bit of roughness to those pieces of glass. So if I change the refractive roughness on the transparency amount to 0, now you'll notice it's going to look like it's just a perfectly clear ice cube, which might be what you want. 5% is what this material came in as. I'm going to turn that back to maybe about a 2 or 3 and just break that up. But you can see it just gives a little breakup to it. But it also takes longer to render. That's one thing to note. All these sort of things are heavy to compute at render time. But anytime you're doing glass, refraction, reflections, things like that, they take a little bit extra time to render. So one thing, if you look at any of these, let's go back to our reference, is a little bit, we sculpted some of those bumps in there, but I want to kind of add a bump map on top of these ice cubes to give it a little bit more breakup to them and a little bit more kind of bend and shape, surface qualities of those. So for that, I want to add a noise layer and make it affect the bump. So we're going to kind of almost fake in more sort of sculpted ridges and detail to that ice. So if I come up to add layer here, what I want to do in the shader tree is inside that ice cubes group, inside the glass frosted preset group, I want to come to add layer, come down to texture, and choose a noise layer. So right now it comes in default set to the diffuse color, but we don't actually have any diffuse amount, so that's not going to give us any qualities. What we want is that to be the bump map. So if I right click here on the effect and come over to surface shading, I'm going to change that effect to bump. It's a little hard to see here, but now it's got a nice waviness to it. But in order to see that, I want to change this previews. Instead of rendering the full ray trace scene, I just want to look at just what that effect is. So if I come to this effects in top of the preview, come to shading effects, I can come look at surface shading. That's where we found the bump, and choose bump. And now it's going to show me just a black and white grayscale of what every channel that's set to bump map is. Problem is, we're no longer seeing the transparency of that glass. We can't see through it, so we can't actually see what that bump map on the ice is. So what I want to do is come to our glass group, double click the outer shell of this. I want to hide those polygons. I don't want to delete them. We could cut them and paste them later, but I just want to hide them. So if you come up here to the select menu, let's scroll, view, and let's just choose hide selected. And now let's do it. Now we can kind of see what those bump is on the ice. And let's just turn for the liquid. Let's double click that guy. We'll come to view, and we'll hide him as well. Hide selected. And now we can see just what this noise layer, this noise procedural, is affecting on the bump map. So we can see it has a frequencies of 4. So if I turn the frequencies on a noise layer down, you can see it's just a little bit more simple of a texture. Higher frequency is more sort of breakup to that noise, but again, we don't want all that. We want just a nice sort of soft, much like the detail we sculpted in earlier. And we change the gain of this quality up. It's basically the contrast of what that image looks like. And if we thought those were too big or too small, we can come to the texture locator of that. And right now, this is the size it's projected as. It's 7 millimeters across. So if I hit that channel equals sign inside the text field, and let's just make that maybe 2 millimeters, you can see that frequency is going to be a lot tighter, but we don't want that. I think probably maybe around, let's hit that equals icon again, 5 millimeters, and there we go. Let's give it a nice little breakup to our bump textures. So now we want to unhide, come back to our glass group in the item list, and unhide all the other things that we hid. So the glass and the liquid, we choose unhide. Now they're back in our scene, and we don't want to view the bump map effect anymore. We want to come back up to the preview engine and just turn that to shading. That's going to come right back to where we were. And as you can see now, the ice cube has a little bit more complexity to it. Now, as you can see, it's taking a little bit of time to render, and that's what's coming from that. That's what's coming from that refractive roughness. So right now, while I'm working in my scene, I want this preview to be as fast as possible. So I'm going to turn this refractive roughness down to 0. And now you'll see everything's rendering just a little bit quicker. Before we render, we might want to turn that back on. But with this bump map, we're getting a nice breakup to these eyes. The problem is it's looking a little too noisy, or it's looking a little bit too influenced by that bump map. And that's coming from the material itself. So if we go to the material itself, it has this bump map amplitude. So that's just how much it's actually exaggerating those bump. So I'm going to turn this instead from 5 millimeters down to 1 millimeter. So we didn't change the scale of the bump, we just changed how much is actually affecting the qualities. And that looks a little bit better. We're getting some cool sort of patterning and fractal stuff happening inside of those ice cubes. So for now, I think we have most of our material set up. And let's jump into actually setting up our environment now so we can see better what this actually is going to look like in our final render.